Hello, hello. I'm your host, not Jason Miles, and welcome back to This is Revolution. Peace to the mods, peace to the chat. This week, we somehow went from ranking world conquerors to eyeing LeBron James's moves to remembering Alan Greenspan, which frankly is a very This is Revolution thing to do. If you missed those shows, check them out after this one. If you're watching and not subscribed, join our 20,000 plus subscribers. It's free. If you're already subscribed, thank you. If you're not, Jason says you're stealing. I would never say that. Also, we're definitely not a cult. But shout out to Jason for this excellent thumbnail today. It's a screenshot from The Bicycle Man, a 2-part episode from the sitcom Different Strokes, which was the very first, very special episode of anything on TV. Bonus points if you know why that episode was considered very special. With that being said, I'm M. Toussaint, and a very special What Fresh Hell awaits you today. We're taking a trip around the globe using 6 recent environmental stories to ask what's happening and why these crises increasingly spill across borders, reshaping politics, economics, and everyday life. Let's get to it. Please welcome our very own necktie enthusiast who definitely inspired Hassan Piker's new look, Deep State Cuba.
Hello there. Hello, everyone. Yes, definitely everything good about Hassan Piker, he's lifted straight from me.
I believe it. So, in order to get in the spirit of things, let me just put that tie on. There we go. All about the neckties. So, since this is a very special What Fresh Hell episode, we have a special guest for you. He is the co-host of Green and Red Podcast, here to give us additional context on those 6 stories. Only I'm allowed to call him Sparky because we went to school together. Please welcome Scott Parkin.
Hey there.
Welcome.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Welcome for a very special episode. And it's not because you're the bicycle man.
Right.
No.
Oh, no.
No, not at all. I remember that episode.
Yeah. Don't want to be that guy.
Very special means traumatizing enough to be memorable.
It was Mr. Carlson from WKRP, wasn't it?
Was it?
I believe it was.
No. I don't want to think about it. Put it in the comments if you know what that is.
Yeah.
Nice to see we're all on code with the new leftist fashions. We've all got our neckties on and presumably pants. We're going to be all over the globe today, so let's get started. I have visuals. Here we go. Let's get started with Europe 2026, heat waves, wildfires, and aircon. As you may have heard, Europe is experiencing one of its worst wildfire seasons on record, with France, Spain, and Portugal hit especially hard. Yesterday, Hungary had a high of around 34 degrees Celsius to 38 degrees Celsius, which in USian oven temperatures was roughly 99 degrees to 101 degrees. High temperatures of 41 degrees Celsius are expected over the next week, which is about 105.8 degrees Fahrenheit. A wet spring followed by record heat turned dense vegetation into fuel, helping fires spread faster and farther. Hundreds of thousands of people have been evacuated as firefighters struggle to contain multiple large fires at once. Scientists say climate change is making Europe's heat waves more intense and increasing the conditions that fuel extreme wildfires. So, Europe is warming faster than any other continent. Cuba, why aren't Europeans adopting aircon, as the Brits call it? And what are the implications of such a mass adoption?
Well, air conditioning is one of the great American inventions, and it requires a certain infrastructure in order to operate properly. And I'm not just talking about, once upon a time, you had the window boxes, which could be added onto a given room to cool it. Those still exist, but when you look at new builds in the United States, most have central air conditioning.
Mhm.
This is easiest to introduce when you have new stocks of housing. New build, you can integrate HVAC cooling systems into the initial build,
Mhm.
and this becomes much more complicated when you're in a place like Europe, where much of the housing stock dates from the post-war period or even the 19th century. In some places, you have these quaint, beautiful, very livable, human-scale castle towns or medieval market towns. Every building is a heritage building. You know, this stone goes all the way back to the Roman Empire. Well, unfortunately, not only did the Romans not have the foresight to put in the HVAC systems themselves, but also this type of construction, which is for the ages, very solid, very durable, a cultural heritage in its own right. Where are you going to put the HVAC holes? I mean, the internet is bad enough, but at least that's wiring. But moving around large amounts of air in order to get the to balance the heat circulating like that, then that requires a more substantial type of re-engineering. Extremely costly to do it while preserving old architecture. Knocking things down and rebuilding, also extremely expensive. In a continent where people don't have that much familiarity with air conditioning, wasn't traditionally felt like it was necessary. After all, we're not talking about Dubai or Las Vegas. People didn't treat it as a necessity. It wasn't one of those essential utilities that that people looked for in making purchasing decisions over homes. Now, staring down the face of 41-degree heat, it becomes a lot more challenging for Europeans just to stay put or do what they had done traditionally, which is just move 100 kilometers for the worst of the summer heat in order to take the waters at Bad Bentheim or go to your alpine chalet or cottage in the country. Partly because the microclimates that would allow you to find some cooler, they're getting swamped by these giant continental-sized heat waves. And partly because, you know, it's still kind of a lot of money, even if you're going a couple of towns over. Many Europeans, especially in the West, have enough generational wealth so that it's not out of reach, but newcomers to Europe, people from the poorer East, it's harder to just move around in order to get away from the heat, putting aside entirely the question about jobs, incomes, and economic necessity.
Scott, would you like to weigh in on this? Do you think part of this is like they want to keep their culture and aircon is like too American? Is that part of it?
I mean, well, I actually just recently was traveling in Europe, and one of the things I noted is that there's a big market for portable air conditioners right now, and I mean, clearly they haven't like developed an infrastructure around it because they weren't having to deal with heat the way in which, like, let's say, like Texas, my home state of Texas, has for, like, decades. But in Europe, as we are experiencing this new normal of heat domes and heat waves and increasing temperatures, is that they are like reacting to it. And of course, the first reactionaries to it are going to be the capitalists. And so there's like a market to sell portable air conditioning. Wouldn't be surprised if we begin seeing, like, bigger installations of it in, like, different parts of the continent as well.
Okay.
The place to look for it is the large public infrastructure, because that, a little like community pools back in the day in the United States, museums, cinemas become places that people go for some refuge, get that sweet, sweet destination air conditioning while you can, and while southern Spain continues to be on fire all the time. We haven't mentioned the wildfires at all, but that's become a significant problem, not just in Europe as well. I'm old enough so that I remember when we called this season summer rather than the burning times. But British Columbia, or any place with a substantial natural forest, you have these annual cycles. They used to be a lot longer, but in the summertime, you can feel the crispy air. Conditions are conducive to wildfires virtually every year. And one advantage of air conditioning is that potentially it could also help filter air in a closed environment. But this is something which requires adaptation at an infrastructural level, as well as some shifts in cultural practices. So that lags behind in Europe. In some ways, the United States, just because of the way that technology was integrated into 20th century development patterns, might have more of that creature comfort side remediation already in place.
In the news, it's been reported for the past several years that this is the hottest summer on record. Would it be better to interpret those headlines as this is the coldest summer of your life? Scott, you first.
It's like that Homer Simpson meme, right? Where Bart's like, it's the hottest summer on record, and Homer's like, it's the coldest. It'll be the coldest summer of your life when it's all done, right?
Yep.
It's the hottest summer so far.
Yeah, it's the hottest summer so far. That's the better meme, I guess.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of things. We actually just did a show which we're actually airing this week around with an author called Ecological Amnesia, which is that as we move into this new normal of heat waves and fires and we can talk about other climate disasters too, but I think heat's the sort of topic of the day. But that people, and I think it's somewhat intentional from institutions, corporations that rule us, is that, like, we're like purposely being made to forget about this time, like probably when I was younger, where we didn't actually have to rely on air conditioning, in parts of the world where they didn't need it before. And so I think there's like this cultural element where we're, being made to forget about before we were really hit with this, like, hit with the climate crisis. And so, like, I think that's a piece of it. And the author actually lays out a whole bunch of ways in which we can combat that, right? Like things like, making a record, people who get involved in community science, oral history, all of that sort of stuff is actually really important ways to think about how, as we get increasingly hotter, is that we also need to recall when it was before it was like that. And then the other piece to me, which, I'm very involved in, as you know, I'm been an organizer for a long time, mostly on climate issues, is that a lot of this is just a fact of political will. Is like there's, large numbers of people who actually want us to do something about the burning of fossil fuels, all of that. and yet we're, dealing with like a huge amount of money from the fossil fuel sector, for example, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit more later. But like there's a lack of political will in our system, and particularly since Trump 2.0 has come in, is that we're actually have really seen the climate movement fade. We're seeing it in more of these like localized battles, like data centers. Data centers has actually become very much an issue for the climate movement, which has sort of receded a little bit on the national level. And so um, I also think that we need to see people re-engage on this issue, because it's literally like killing us, and it's like a slow burn of killing us like a frog in boiling water. And then we're also intentionally being tried to made to forget that we actually didn't have to suffer through these climate disasters. That was a little all over the place there, but like,
No, got it, got it.
yeah,
Cooper,
yeah.
did you want to say something?
Yes, I think that it's an excellent. It's important to remember the before times so that we have a target, a goal to work towards, and the shift in Trump 2.0. The remarkable thing about it isn't that the United States is addicted to fossil fuel money and that these industries are playing a baleful role that's leading to greater and greater global warming, more reverse, more destructive forms of climate change in a never-ending cycle. But that on other issues unrelated to climate directly, things like global trade and especially defense, so much of the world system is deteriorated because of Trump's decisions that other governments, which had previously been much more forward-looking and much more amenable to taking steps towards a green energy transition, emission reduction, they've all shifted towards a defense, national survival mentality. Europeans had been held up as a country that has maintained high standards of living, high levels of technological development without creating a great deal of polluting industry. A lot of that took the place of offshoring things, but even so, you didn't have mass adoption of air conditioning. You had more transit-focused cities. It was a less carbon-intensive way of living what could be called the good life, economically speaking, materially speaking. But now they have to worry about Trump on one side, Putin on the other side, and so they're going to build a bunch of polluting industries that create weapons that pollute more before they're destroyed without anybody benefiting from them, right? So you have a destructive type of economic development and economic shift that goes along with Trump's policies on defense, on international relations, on global trade. A major step backwards for the climate movement, even in areas that don't directly touch climate.
I think that there's trepidation around adopting aircon just in mass because, they're aware of the implications of the energy usage. However, I have seen footage of people sort of doing the Walmart Black Friday thing in stores to get fans, which also has, an energy cost.
There's no way out of this which doesn't
Hmm.
have an energy cost, which is why the Green New Deal and other major programs that were geared towards climate preservation and mitigation dealt with this as a supply issue. How do we replace this polluting energy with energy that doesn't have the same kind of environmental footprint? This could have been a massive win-win for everyone. After all, China has demonstrated that this is a sector with massive export potential. This is a way to produce good jobs. This is a way to reindustrialize responsibly and to stimulate different allied sectors of technological growth. But instead, Trump has abandoned many of the projects that were pushed in Biden's term. And instead, we have this renewed focus on renewables, not on renewables, on fossil fuels, even as the Middle East is on fire and access to those, to that output is in doubt. Maybe, there is this faint hope, right? This desperate search for a silver lining around the Hormuz crisis, that maybe this will force countries strategically to rethink their reliance on fossil fuels, since it's shown that there's no guarantee of supply. But that's adding in a whole bunch of extra steps and a whole bunch of dead people to get to a place where we should have been 20 years ago.
The one thing I would say about Trump and renewable energy is I don't actually think it's just that he's abandoned the project. So the Inflation Reduction Act was, tried to implement a whole lot of different projects which would lift up the green economy. But Trump is overtly declared war on renewable energy. It's part of the narrative. They are making it actually very difficult for them to get permits for larger scale renewable projects like wind and solar. He constantly, denigrates China because they have actually moved to so much renewable energy. They make it difficult to get solar panels from China, for example. Even his narrative is about how windmills are bad because they kill birds. And then the other piece is it's not just coming from the Trump administration, but it's also within the conservative movement. We've seen I've done a lot of work on climate campaigning over the years where we've targeted companies, where we, for example, have gotten Wall Street banks to actually have policy about not funding pipeline projects or coal mining projects or coal mining companies, et cetera. And, state attorney generals, people like Ken Paxton, have actually sued Wall Street banks over having a climate policy. And so there's actually a fear going on within environmental nonprofits about how banks won't respond to any of our campaign because they're actually more scared of the far right. So that's one piece, and then the other piece is that these fossil fuel companies have also targeted the climate movement. And I think the most known case is where Energy Transfer Partners has actually sued Greenpeace in this frivolous lawsuit in a North Dakota court over their supposed support of the Dakota Access Pipeline. But then we've also seen, red states, conservative states, pass all kinds of anti-pipeline protest laws, making it a felony, making it an act of terrorism, all of that sort of stuff. And so there's a very organized campaign to destroy people who have advocated on climate and against fossil fuels.
Facts. Let's go from Europe to your home state of Texas.
Okay.
So let's talk about relief during Corpus Christi's water crisis. 1 second. Here. Corpus Christi, Texas, came within reach of becoming the first major U.S. city to run out of water. The population of 300,000 is facing severe water shortage due to a 5-year drought, heavy industrial water consumption, and failed desalination plant development. This has sparked bitter conflicts between rural neighbors, refineries, and energy companies. According to the Texas Tribune, as of late July 2026, that's this week, intense storms and flooding have provided significant relief to Corpus Christi's water crisis, delaying the projected Stage 1 water emergency to September 2028. However, this does not fully solve the water crisis. Scott, you've organized with a crew from Corpus Christi who've been working on this. What can you tell us about the situation on the ground and the efforts to help folks there?
Well, first I'll say a couple things. There's been actually some really great reporting with the Texas Observer, which is this great
Oh,
muckraking publication in Texas. It was home of Molly Ivins and Jim Hightower.
mm-hmm.
But I mean, the first is that we need to actually look at who the big consumers of water in the Corpus Christi area are. New Oasis County, Texas, by the way, which was a plus Trump county, is the region's largest water user is a new plastics plant operated by ExxonMobil and Saudi Aramco, and so that is the largest water user. Second large water user is a crypto Bitcoin mine. Shout out to Candace Byrne with the Texas Observer, who we've had on the show, who actually has done a lot of reporting on how crypto and data centers are actually consuming a lot of water all over Texas. And so when we're looking at the amount of water being consumed in Corpus Christi, is we actually need to look at the industrial players. We need to look at crypto, and see what we're doing to sort of stop the industry. And it's Texas. And when I talked about red states which are implementing anti-protest laws, Texas is like at the top. But the folks on the ground in Corpus Christi have actually been advocating a lot through local government, through city politics, through city council, all of that. They actually stopped a desalination plant, which was the establishment's response to this water crisis. The desalination plant didn't actually, to be honest, wasn't very economically viable, according to the reporting I've read. And then also it would have actually had a pretty harmful effect on the local environment. There would have been dead zones in the Gulf off of Corpus Christi as a result of this desalination plant. And so some of the folks who I'm friends with in the region actually organized against that desalination plant, and they've pretty much killed it. Now they're applying that to what they're calling the Fair Water Amendment, which is a citizen-led ballot initiative in Corpus Christi. I believe they've gotten it on the ballot in Corpus Christi for November, but it would eliminate a drought surcharge exemption, which these big industrial players actually aren't even paying like taxes related to the drought, which the city has. And it's a ballot initiative. We've seen like what a lot of ballot initiatives have been doing around the country. It's led by a number of community organizations, including the Texas Campaign for the Environment and Corpus Christi DSA. But we're looking at like a pretty serious crisis, and what's happening in Corpus Christi is going to happen in other parts, particularly of the Southwest and the Gulf and the Gulf Coast, as we sort of move into this era of resource scarcity, of water scarcity, and also, like I said, we need to continue to look at the industrial players, which are actually consuming a lot of water, almost like tax-free, right? While like regular people are actually suffering quite a bit through this process, including, and not just like your everyday like water consumer, but also farmers are being hit by this as well, and like lots of other sort of like smaller players, not the Exxons and Saudi Aramcos and crypto bros.
There are drought restrictions already, like, with watering your lawn and that sort of thing. And these companies are just allowed to use as much water as they want.
Yep.
This has far reaching implications already, like as far as Phoenix and Las Vegas, I've heard. Yeah, I suppose all those cities are sort of on notice.
Yeah, I do want to just like emphasize the power of organizing, that they're able to stop industry-led initiatives that would benefit industry and still make it difficult for everyday people. And so like organizing is actually one of the most effective tool we have at challenging this corporate power and political power.
Cuba, what are the political implications of Corpus Christi being the first in the U.S. to experience a water crisis while being in a red state?
Well, I think that Scott pointed out something very important. The first strategy that's going to be pursued by the most powerful economic and political interests is going to be to try to exempt themselves from the burdens that the drought conditions are imposing on the city. So get an exemption from drought taxes or fees, surcharges. Get your own dedicated supply of fresh water. Find ways to make sure that you're first in line for whatever water sources free up. And because these are more powerful interests, and because they have forward and backward linkages, right? Like the crypto bros produce digital technology that enriches Trump, that attaches to other parts of the financial sector. Data centers are owned by AI companies that are the only growth centers for in the American capital markets. These factors give them the power to push more and more to insulate themselves at the expense of everyone else from environmental changes. One of the ways that organizing helps, what Scott's been describing, is that it forces them back into the lifeboat with the rest of us. That they're not going to get their tailor-built, individualized solution. No, this is a problem that affects everyone collectively, and it needs to be collectively solved. That insistence, I think, is should always be maintained. That's a pressure point that we can't give up, because otherwise it'll just turn into a form of competitive sacrifice. First we get the poors, then we get the non-citizens, then we get the citizens that we don't like so much, until eventually you're just left with data centers and crypto bros. Politically speaking, this is precisely the sort of challenge which requires capable, motivated, and energetic public sector solution. This is what government was made for, right? Something that affects everyone, that touches upon the lives of everyone in Corpus Christi and everyone in the United States more broadly. Therefore, it should be solved using the collective power that's available democratically to U.S. citizens. Companies will resist that as much as possible and try to monopolize as many resources for themselves, for their own private solutions. Now, unfortunately, this federal government is the least suited for finding those kinds of solutions. They've been arsonists, not firefighters, this whole second term. And even under Biden, where there was some effort at forward-looking shifts in energy production, for instance, it's always an uphill struggle, even in with a liberal progressive administration. Now, is this going to, since it impacts a red district, red state, is this going to shift some public perceptions enough so that you might have a change in political representation? Possibly. Trump is extremely unpopular. It looks like there's going to be a shift towards more elected Democrats. But at the same time, the system politically has been trying to insulate itself as much as possible, not just on the federal level with the SAVE Act and everything, but also state by state. You have attempts by Republicans in power to entrench themselves, gerrymander, make every effort to eliminate the competitive accountability that's supposed to go along with democracy. Now, that can operate without solving people's problems or even acknowledging them, as long as you have a scapegoat. Who are you going to scapegoat this time?
Yeah.
The Mexico, Mother Nature, right? Thirsty school children, right? And this is also why, at the peak level, giant corporations and right-wing groups always push against any attempts to enshrine water as a human right. The only way that it works for them is if you can put a meter on it, control access to it, and make it a private issue that's settled between a consumer and the capitalist owner of the water system. I think that this, under regular circumstances, a city running out of water in this way would send a very strong message to voters and to the public in general that this is an emergency, something needs to be done. I'm concerned that feeding into the environment that we have now, it may lead to more extreme polarization and a even greater motivation for right-wing forces to try to undermine forms of democratic accountability.
Can I ask you both an unfair question? Does Las Vegas have the right to exist?
Well,
I would say Las Vegas has some of the best organizing going on around in the country right now. It's the most unionized city in the nation, I believe, or at least the top.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
don't
Bernie
hate.
had a lot of support there, right? And they were pretty organized. They have unions and stuff.
It's the only reason Las Vegas is the only reason that Nevada is a purple state, right?
Mhm.
Outside of
Yeah,
Vegas and
yeah.
kind of Reno, it's all deep, deep, deep red. Um, Las Vegas exists because of this glorious moment when it seemed as though 20th century technology made the environment irrelevant. We're learning the limits of that technology and the externalities that go along with it, go along with using it on a large scale. Now, if personally, and maybe this is a little too Eastern European, I don't think anybody has the right to exist. Life is struggle. We're all pushing that boulder uphill, and it always rolls down. Um, it's a question of how it will exist. Will it continue to have? Will you continue to have the Bellagio fountain in the middle of the desert? Will you continue to have these sparkling desert palace cities being thrown up like Dubai, of course, is an example in the Middle East, but there are ambitious projects for things like now the Wall City in Saudi Arabia, um, which are just the uh, next level manifestation of the same desire to build in the desert, build in places that are not particularly conducive climate wise to human life. We'll either need to adjust to make our lifestyles have less of an impact and require less comfort, or yeah, eventually, potentially, we'll see some movement away from the worst affected areas, and you'll end up with white people climate refugees, which I'm sure will be very behaved and line up in an orderly fashion.
And that what's going on in France and Spain right now.
Mm.
Yeah.
The in France and Spain,
The
the
white climate refugees.
exactly. The I dread the day when Floridians realize that the jig is up, right?
Right.
Um, because Florida, man, not just a white climate refugee, it's going to be a very particular kind of climate refugee.
That's a fact. Definitely from state to state. I remember Asheville, North Carolina was touted as some sort of climate change haven. And then it got hit with that huge hurricane, and I'm not even sure if it's fully recovered yet. This was like maybe 2 years ago.
It was right before the election, the 2024 election.
Yeah. I really liked Asheville. And it's like nowhere is really safe. Some people said Michigan, but
They say
Alaska,
Vermont a lot. They say Vermont a lot too, which
mm,
we see lots of flooding in Vermont.
right.
yeah, the idea that there's a refuge which is going to stay perfectly intact is a fantasy. The question is, um, can you find places where remediation is going to be less costly, is going to be easier? The
Mhm.
answer is, of course, yes. That's why billionaires have bug out bunkers in New Zealand. It's got very good fundamentals. However, as soon as you get all of the climate refugees into one of these areas, they lose all of those advantages because of the pressure that's placed on them by the newcomers. It's a wicked paradox. There's no
I,
easy solution, which is why optimally we'd be shifting to green forms of energy and using that to power at the very least, the crypto and the data centers. Um, Ideally, maybe less crypto, and maybe the only AI is an ecology engine that tells us how to prevent ourselves from boiling to death.
One thing I'll throw out there is I think a lot when they talk about like climate safe havens is they're talking about places where you can escape the heat. There's going to
Mm,
be parts of the world and parts of even the country that are going to be uninhabitable in the next 50 to 100 years because of increasing heat. What people aren't safe from in any of these places is the sort of unraveling of the climate of the weather systems. And so we're still going to see rains, we're still going to see wildfires in places where it may be like safe from the heat. Just to kind of throw that out there is like because I hear a lot. I'm in a lot of climate activist circles where they talk about where they can go and live, where they would
mhm.
be safe from climate, and no one's going to escape the unraveling weather system. We may be able to escape the heat though as we move if we move further north.
That's a fair point. It's worthwhile to escape the heat. Yeah. Just quickly, if you guys can tell us, because we need to go to another country soon. Um, what is this response tell us about the preparedness of the United States and places in the United States facing water scarcity? Are we ready for prime time? Yeah.
No, absolutely not. Actually the other point I was thinking about is that we're climate at this point is inevitable. The And so one of the things that we need to be doing is actually preparing for climate resilience. I mean, we can decarbonize all we want at this point, which I've dedicated my life to that in many ways. And so, but like we're seeing the effects of climate change, which are at this point somewhat irreversible. And so we also need to be thinking a lot more about climate resilience.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe more progressive parts of the country are actually preparing for that. But then there's a lot of parts of the country, and my home state of Texas, I would put into that category, is is not one of those states. And so, other than where like we see the private sector doing it, and so I think that's a really important thing to note. And this administration and many other people in the far right, still pretend like climate change, like Pete Hegseth called climate change a religion, which he was going to purge from the Pentagon. Chris Wright, who's the Secretary of Energy, said that global warming is sort of a no big deal kind of thing, and it's just a product of a cult bent on scaring kids. And so at this point, even some of those progressive liberal initiatives to deal with climate where I didn't think were enough is like we're actually dealing with a whole other um, sort of nightmare scenario with a bunch of people who want to just do everything they can to deny that this is even happening. It's an attack on reality.
Yeah, we're on the Titanic, and they're telling us that lifeboats are fake and gay.
Yeah, and just go to happy hour and don't pay attention.
And don't pay attention. Climate change is Krampus. That's wild. Tony Red says wet bulb death. This is something that terrifies me. I just wanted to say that. It's just, oh man, it's rough. It's rough out there. And there are things we can do. You certainly don't have to go out like that. Let's go to Iran for happy news.
I don't think that's a
So
climate haven either, just to put it
it's
out there.
it's not a climate haven. Very
I
few.
wonder if they have air conditioning in their missile cities.
Good question.
That might be ironically right. If you think about it, you build these missile cities underground for wartime, and during peacetime, hey, you now have a Cappadocia style underground installation that you can repurpose as a place to escape the heat, right? Like eventually they'll convert all of the missile workshops into luxury loft condominiums for Tehran hipsters.
I think that's the
I
plot of a show on Peacock.
I went and did a history tour in Vietnam in the last a decade ago, and did some of the trips into some of the tunnels where the Viet Cong lived. They had all kinds of air filter systems in those tunnels.
Hmm.
It wasn't like probably a missile city like we see in Iran, but it was they were prepared for dealing with like air.
Yeah, I'm glad someone's prepared for something. Um, so let's go to Iran. Will the Iran war cause a global oil crisis? The active 2026 Iran war began on February 28, 2026, following the breakdown of diplomatic negotiations and has expanded into a multi month confrontation marked by airstrikes, missile barrages, and regional economic disruptions. The ongoing conflict has effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, driven up global energy prices, and sparked regional diplomatic proposals to manage the crucial waterway. But those energy prices could be higher. The Iran war has not yet caused a full global oil crisis because of extraordinary global adjustments, such as strategic reserve releases, sharp drops in Chinese demand, and alternative pipeline routing. Instead of oil pricing scaling to historic highs, they have been kept relatively low. But for how long? Cooper, do you know for how long? How long is this war going to last? What are we doing
Well,
here?
that's an excellent question. I believe we may be in the FA phase of we're just entering the FO phase of yeah, of that delightful right wing acronym. The I don't I don't know why markets haven't priced oil more aggressively, because all of the developments, especially over the past week, have been have emphasized the vulnerability of the oil system and the willingness of Iran and its allies to use that as a pressure point against the global economy. In addition to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz on one side and attacks on infrastructure, we had hits on energy plants, refineries, port systems by not just Iran, but also the Houthis in Yemen.
Mhm.
And most recently, something that no one had brought up as an immediate possibility, there was an attack on a couple of liquefied natural gas tankers in the Egyptian port of Damietta. These are essentially just floating. They're like one of those enemies that you shoot and they blow up in any video game, right? They're enormous floating tankers of hyper concentrated, hyper dense natural gas. They can light up like a mini atom bomb. There was a recent explosion on one of these in the Mediterranean. A Ukrainian drone hit a Russian LNG tanker. They carefully targeted it so that the impact would occur when it was in the middle of the sea, far from any port facilities or other shipping, because when it went up, it looked like a second sunrise. It just a massive explosion. Two of these ships, not just one, but two, were hit by small drones in the Egyptian port of Damietta, which is near the Suez Canal. That escalation shows that even the northern end of the Red Sea is not secure. Now, if you had a sensible US government, then they would be very quickly crying uncle and trying to restore energy shipment to reestablish some kind of normalcy. Instead, I think that Trump has used his connections in peak finance among the billionaire class to just engineer artificially low prices for energy futures in the United States and on international markets for as long as possible. I think that he's reached some kind of agreement with Xi Jinping in China, tapping the Chinese reserves and preventing Chinese purchases from driving up prices like they would in a normal market-driven condition. So I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. There's nothing improving about the war. More infrastructure and more essential parts of the Middle Eastern energy system have been under attack, have been under pressure as a result of the escalation of the conflict. And we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I don't know when, because it'll involve eroding certain buffers, not just the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but also the financial buffers that allow prices to stay artificially low. Probably by the end of the summer or October, we're going to be hitting depletion levels of the American Strategic Petroleum Reserve. While there's it has a certain capacity, you can't draw it down beneath 20%. Below that level, you're starting to compromise the integrity of the salt caverns in which it's stored. So once you hit that point, you're just going to have to drink the whole milkshake and give up and find a new glass. And under regular circumstances, that would be such a fundamentally irresponsible policy move that you'd need to avoid it at all costs. But with this administration, that seems like a dangerous possibility.
Sorry, did you want to say something about this, Scott?
I mean, on the war, I mean, I don't know if I have anything like really substantive to add on the climate issue. We, you know, we were talking before about how this has sort of like led to like a stuff in Trump 2.0 has led to a little bit of a fade of the climate movement. I think the fact that the attention has gone to, we have to have the Strait of Hormuz open so we can get the fossil fuels out, has also been very undermining of an argument about moving to a transition, because everyone is seeing the importance of fossil fuels, of cheap fossil fuels. The price of gas is like another issue that we talk a lot about in American society. And don't get me wrong, I'm happy to be undermining the Trump administration in any way possible, but like it's also like somewhat, to me, continues to firm up the argument that we need fossil fuels when maybe we don't. The only thing I would add is I feel like it just continues this narrative of like fossil fuels are essential to our existence.
I think that is a great point. We only have you for a few more minutes. I did want to ask you this question. If governments can mobilize this quickly to stabilize oil markets, why is it so difficult to mobilize at the same scale for climate change? Why?
I mean, to me, it's fairly obvious that the thing that really, a little bit of just what I was speaking to, is that it's about the money, right? And so like Chevron just reported its largest quarterly net profit ever, like $12 billion. Exxon announced a second quarter profit of $14.5 billion. Liquefied natural gas sector is reporting all kinds of a surge in profits. And so to me, it's like this wealthy elite are making a lot of money, from this war, but more importantly, they're making a lot of money from making sure that there's not reduction in carbon emissions, right? And so stuff I said sort of towards the beginning of the show, where they're trying to put Greenpeace out of business. They are passing laws to stop people who protest pipelines. Trump has gone through and dismantled everything that the IRA, which I actually feel like was like an industry compromise bill, but he's still going through and trying to dismantle that. And so it's about the money. It's about these people making money. I mean, in 2024, the Trump campaign raised $1 billion. They had a goal of raising $1 billion from like the fossil fuel sector, from its executives, from its stockholders, to basically put Trump back in office. And this is what they want, is like to make a whole lot of money, and also destroy people who are advocating for the climate sector. To me, there was a point where we were actually seeing a pivot of even fossil fuel companies, moving into like how we can profit off of renewables, which I have a lot of issue with as well as someone who wants to dismantle the wealthy elite. But I'll say is that like Trump is like, no, we're gonna just like, do everything we can to make oil men richer, and then he also wants to bring back things like coal too, which is like pretty dead in the U.S. We've hit peak coal. It's also fading, globally as well. But he's all about bringing that back as well. So.
Huh. I wanted to just go through some of the comments really quickly and talk to you about the environment before you go. Political Economy says, I thought the biggest environmental problem was beef. So this was back when we were having our aircon discussion. Is it still beef? Should we be vegans?
You want me to answer? Kuba probably has some thoughts on beef and veganism, right? I mean, there's a myriad of issues which are leading to the climate crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Beef is one of them. Rainforest deforestation, and in places like Brazil, they're deforesting the rainforest so they can raise beef and grow soy to feed the beef. And so there's a lot of climate issues related to the cultivation of beef in our society. I haven't looked at the numbers recently to see where we're seeing more carbon emissions, whether it's from fossil fuels or whether it's from rainforest destruction or whether it's from beef cultivation. But they're all pretty bad. They're also somewhat all interconnected in my mind. So.
Political.
My day job is fighting for rainforests, not to cut down rainforests in Southeast Asia and in South America. And so, a little shout out to my organization, Rainforest Action Network, is we're actually working a lot to stop tropical deforestation because it's actually it has a huge carbon footprint.
We had an author on recently who wrote about the founding of Rainforest Action Network. Very cool that you worked there.
Yeah, we had him on the Green and Red podcast too.
Awesome. With Bob Bazenko, friend of the show.
Bob was out of the office that day. I had a guest host, but yeah.
Political Economy says he needs, or she, if this person watches this show, it's most likely a he.
Yeah.
He needs both a fan and an AC. Kuba, do you have a fan and an AC on right now?
I'm in Vancouver. We've been walking on water this whole summer so far. The temperature's pretty comfortable, and all I need to do is crack a window and I get some fresh air. However, as soon as I go into a hot climate, I go full Las Vegas Strip creature comforts mode. I do not bear the heat very well. The happiest summer I ever spent was touching the Arctic Circle in Iceland. Not a hot climate model, not engineered for the tropical latitudes. But to pick up on the whole issue of beef and the different sectoral impacts on climate change and environmental degradation, when you think about the footprint of any given sector, it's not just the carbon that's emitted in producing it, but all of the inputs that go into it. Beef produces methane just as the cows fatten up and grow. It's very land intensive, very water intensive. The costs of the environmental costs are externalized, not reflected in the price that consumers pay. But there's such an association with beef protein, right? Meat in general, and beef specifically in the Western imagination, and especially the American imagination, as being, signs of prosperity, good nutrition, a certain status indicator, that it's very difficult to wean consumers off of this. One of the remarkable adjustments that you see in East Asia, people don't want to give up protein in their diet, but they're much more flexible in where that protein comes from. So you'll get some solutions to the global crisis, to the general ecological crisis that we're in, coming from Klaus Schwab and the Davos set, that try to find systemic solutions that might square some circles. The idea, for instance, of insect protein as an alternative to beef. Let me tell you, if you can get people to eat crickets or bamboo worms instead of beef, yeah, that would be an enormous improvement in ecological stewardship and carbon emission. Now go online and propose that on Twitter, right? You'll immediately get inundated by the very most aggressive reactionary elements, accusing you of being a bug eater. I'll never do that, etc., etc. Right. The reality is that is an entirely viable position. You can just reject any kind of compromise with ecological reality. That's what happened on Easter Island. That's what happened on Greenland. But the consequences of that, if you're getting it wrong, the Greenland Norse froze to death in their stone houses next to their livestock as the environment shifted. A few kilometers away on the coast, you had Inuit that survived to this very day, right? In relatively healthy, relatively stable communities, because they were willing to eat whale, they were willing to hunt, they were willing to live a more nomadic and transient type of lifestyle. But the cultural commitment that the European Norse had to a certain diet, a certain way of life, meant that when the environment shifted, they died along with the factors that made that possible. And I see a lot of people locked in to lifestyles and habits which are short-term unsustainable and long-term suicidal.
You've been turning phrases all day, man. Okay.
I think.
We're going to have to say goodbye to Scott Parkin soon. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Some final thoughts to close out your appearance here?
Just that despite being in a challenging time, I'm very heartened to see all the organizing happening. I also see where I think we're going to see a resurgence in climate things, climate organizing, climate movement as things get worse, right? And so just encourage everyone out there to get involved, because that's what we need. That and watch the Green and Red podcast.
Yes, with Bob Bazenko.
With Bob Bazenko. It's Bob Bazenko and Scott Parkin. It's not just Bob Bazenko.
That's right. I love your show. Actually, here in other places, and you speak to it so well. So thank you for being here, Scott. I can pull up the sound, so here we go as you head out. Appreciate your time. Mr. Kuba.
Bicycle episode.
It's the two of us. I wanted to ask you a quick question, and then we'll do a little promotion for the show and stuff. So Political Economy says he needs both a fan and an AC. Kushlik says, I do like a big fan. It's just as good as AC. Is Kushlik a better person in political economy in terms of the environment? Go.
The whole issue is that we're trying to address a systemic problem with individual consumer virtue solutions. Sure, like an AC is worse for the environment than a fan. Um, you know what the best possible thing to do for the environment would be? To die and decompose in a traditional shallow grave serial killer style, right? Like the dead require uh, almost as little carbon as the unborn. If um, if we're serious about looking at the math that leads to changes in global temperature and disruptions to the world system, world weather system, then the main emitters are industry, private airplanes, the military industrial complex, things that individual consumer choices have very little impact on. That's where we need to do the work. And I am typically reluctant to acknowledge Davos man as having anything of value to forward. But ideas around like the Green New Deal, shifting towards less protein intensive or less beef intensive diets, these kinds of adjustments, they are attempts to, within a neoliberal framework, try to address the drivers of climate change. Granted, the neoliberal framework itself is a big source of many of the worst forces causing climate change, but at least there was an awareness there that something needed to be done and an attempt to reform or adjust the system in ways to make it easier. And now we're at a point where the system that's gone, and instead we have this MAGA style capitalism, which is in total denial about the very reality of climate change. We that's a very much more challenging position to be in. The hope, such as it is that maybe the disasters that this brings upon the United States and the rest of the world will drive people away from this kind of politics and back towards, at the very least, a Buttigieg style neoliberalism, which will use some tweaks and adjustments to hopefully get to a more sustainable environmental glide path. But, you know, many people on the left will say that's too weak, doesn't go far enough. We need to go full revolution and re-engineer our economic system from the ground up. There's something to be said for that, if you can pull it off. The reactionary solution, which we shouldn't lose sight of, and which was brought up in the chat, well, one reason why they're not panicking is they're fine with mass death. If half of the world's population were to die out, then do you really think that the American Patriot Front would care? Do you really think that this would bother the lifestyles of billionaires in Manhattan and London? No, as long as it was the right 50% of the global population, then they would just get out the champagne and reduce the temperature in their air-conditioned penthouse suites by another couple degrees.
I mean, you make a good point. I just really want. I appreciate your talking about the left in this context. I don't think there's enough discussion of both or left solutions for the environmental crisis, or just ideas around it. It's a big problem, and I prefer answers to come from the left. So the show is not over yet. Scott had to go, but we're still here. We just want to tell you to hit like and leave a comment on Apple or wherever you listen to this show. Let people know about the show. Spread the word. Share it. Put the links in different places on your social media. Tell a friend. I know you have at least one. And let's go to the Arctic, a place that Cuba is very passionate about.
The only place which gets cold enough for me to be comfortable.
There you go. We want you comfy. Does melting permafrost equal higher nuclear risks? Climate change is transforming the Arctic faster than almost anywhere on Earth. Melting permafrost, rising temperatures, and increasingly severe weather threaten military bases, nuclear waste sites, reactors, ports, and other critical infrastructure built for a frozen landscape that no longer exists. At the same time, shrinking sea ice is increasing competition among Arctic nations over shipping routes, natural resources, and military positioning. Scientists warn that governments are not preparing quickly enough for combined environmental and geopolitical risks. Climate change is usually framed as an environmental issue. Why should we think of it as a national security issue, Cuba?
So back going all the way back to the 1990s, you had security planners in the Pentagon identifying climate change as a U.S. security threat. Anybody with objective lens on geopolitics will recognize that climate has substantial impacts on the security of many different nations, especially ones that are even ones very far from the Arctic proper. You have stresses that are placed on populations, right? Water shortages lead to civil unrest. Food shortages lead to revolutions. These types of crises then have significant security implications. In the Arctic, there was the cold weather, remoteness from population centers, inhospitability, and the sea ice packed all the way up to the coast meant that development in that region was uneconomical. You couldn't really do anything with all of this land. If you look at maps of Canada, the United States, Russia, all of the Arctic littoral has maybe a couple of cities, towns of 10,000 people. It's not a densely populated or developed area. Because of that, it was attractive for all kinds of secret projects and military bases where the geography provided an advantage. Nuclear sites, the Tsar Bomba explosion. Tsar Bomba was the Soviet Union's largest nuclear warhead. That was tested on Novaya Zemlya, I believe, which is an island, an Arctic island north of Russia. It was believed that the permafrost provided a stable foundation where you could just forget about things you left there, that the cold was going to take care of it. What we're seeing is that that's not the case. The permafrost, which is the layer of ground ice that persists throughout the entire year. So if you go north enough, far enough north, then under the dirt, you'll hit ice. And it's just been like that for eons. As that melts, anything that was buried in it or anything that was built upon it is undermined and released. One concern is that there will be prehistoric pathogens, viruses or bacteria, fungi that emerge as decomposing animal matter or plant matter is exposed by the melting permafrost. There's also massive sinks of methane all across the Arctic. And as the permafrost melts, that methane is released. And methane is, of course, much more serious in its impact than CO2. Additionally, all of these nuclear installations, military bases, other security centers. The permafrost melts, and whatever they left behind, be it toxic waste, be it radioactive materials, weapon systems, all of that gets exposed as well, possibly releasing radiation, possibly poisoning the local environment. This area, as Arctic ice retreats, also becomes an attractive site for investment. And you have a series of ports and infrastructure that are getting developed for northern routes in Canada and in Russia as well. Chinese shipping has begun experimenting. A few vessels have already made the transit for going around the northern edge of Russia to get to Europe. If this builds up into a new strategic trade route, well, the Gulf of Hormuz has shown to us what happens with strategic trade routes. And that same kind of conflict could be reproduced, since in the Arctic you have, it's not Iran and the United States, it's Russia, Europe, and America, all in contact with one another for potentially strategically important, valuable, unfortunately too, oil-rich territories in the Arctic and off the Arctic coast.
Wow. I also have some concern about the melting permafrost and disease. Are we looking at a comeback of smallpox or the like to a raw milk drinker near you?
There's an excellent series that was on Amazon called, I want to say Fortitude. The first season is good. The second season's okay. After that, I no longer recommend. And it's based entirely on the plot cycles around mammoth remains that are exposed by melting permafrost, which contain pathogen. We don't know what's in the permafrost.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically all that can be said there. It preserves tissue to the point where we have some very well preserved specimens of mammoth DNA that survived for hundreds of thousands of years thanks to the permafrost. That's also going to be true of microbial life, which may or may not cause disease in humans. We don't know what's going to come out. Life is like a box of chocolates, as they say, and the permafrost no less. Frankly, as real as that concern is, we have more tangible and less hypothetical things to focus on before we even get there. But yeah, anthrax, and not only that, but since we're talking about strains that are antiquated, right, thousands of years old, there's no guarantee that the resistance that we have to similar pathogens will impact them as well, right? It could be a little like the indigenous North Americans being exposed to smallpox, as you said. We just don't know.
I'm moving to the permafrost, then I will live forever, someone said. Okay. So my next question is, the permafrost melting, does that make cooperation between nations more likely or conflict more likely?
If it were Obama, then yeah, we could talk about cooperation, but it's not. Under these conditions, there could be the permafrost could melt and we could discover the secrets of cheap, abundant, carbon-free fusion energy in some abandoned extraterrestrial, space installation, and Trump would find a way to turn that into deteriorating environmental conditions and global conflict, right? Like,
Yeah.
under these circumstances with these players, of course it's going to lead to more conflict. There's no willingness to share, and the structures that were put in place through the 20th century to try to limit great power competition and reduce the likelihood of large scale warfare, that's being disassembled in front of our eyes, right? So I don't see, even though many of the real benefits of developing the Arctic are only available if you do it collectively, if you cooperate, if you make agreements on who gets what, and work collectively on these international shipping routes. People are just not going to do that as they scramble for their own secure peace, that at least they can guarantee that will be under their control. So I see this as an aggravating factor, not as anything that can lead to improved outcomes, at least under these political conditions.
Not a chance to come together to solve a large global problem that can only be solved by coming together. Really?
Like, if hostile aliens came in, then Trump would just try to cut a deal with them, right? We're not in Independence Day, right? I don't even think we're in Dr. Strangelove. We're in something much dumber than that.
Yeah, we're going to have Florida man climate refugees. That was quite an image that you painted for us. You can pronounce this better than me. Can you tell me about the Svalbard Global Seed Vault?
So the Norwegians, bless their hearts, and I mean that. Actually, that's not shade. They're oil rich, but they've used that wealth in many very forward-looking ways, right, to shore up their social democratic welfare state, but also international aid, and with some sense of long-term global responsibility. So the Svalbard is an Arctic island under Norwegian control, and it was selected because of its remoteness, because of the relatively stable conditions on that island, and the low temperature, as the site of a repository for agricultural and botanical samples from all over the world. The idea being that when we inevitably fuck up the rest of the planet, the survivors will be able to tap into this reserve to try to reestablish human life and civilization, bring back ecosystems, remediate, save what still can be saved. Of course, melting permafrost is now threatening the archive itself, but I'm confident that the Norwegians will be able to figure it out. But yeah, the shifts in the climate are occurring so rapidly that even groups that had planned ahead, that were thinking in these terms, have been taken by surprise at how quickly things are deteriorating.
That is one of the things that it's interesting and it's morbid at the same time. I've devoted a lot of my life to art and design, and I started to hear about scientists trying to figure out how to label things, like, say, nuclear waste, so that people can read it in the future. What kind of symbols will people be able to read? What kind of text? I mean,
This is not a place of honor.
Yeah, It's very scary when the people who think ahead are still like, whoa,
Yeah, I
we're
mean,
gonna have to leave.
well, yeah, it's the exact opposite of the year 2000 optimism of mid-century America, right? Flying cars, Jetsons, Robo-Maid.
Hmm.
Um, Instead, it's like, okay, so obviously, if we're thinking far enough ahead, civilization has collapsed because look at us, right? Obviously, that's going to happen. So, what do we do in order to protect our um, post-apocalyptic, subliterate descendants that probably have completely new languages and cultures and have destroyed the material basis for remembering all of our history? And there's the idea is to try to engineer around things like nuclear sites
Hmm.
the same kind of built environment that makes people uncomfortable and wanting to leave. Um, it's a fascinating project, right? And when you look at some of this hostile architecture, it's really quite striking and moving. Um, some of the ideas are completely off the hook too. For instance, one possible approach was to engineer a species of cat that would change color if exposed to radiation. They would glow.
Wow.
And then you introduce folk belief that when the cats are glowing, it's dangerous, right? You have to leave.
We have to leave.
We have to leave.
The cats are glowing.
Cats are glowing. No good here. And honestly, if I saw a cat that was glowing in the dark, I'd probably want to leave.
Cancel the DoorDash. Let's just go.
Let's just go. Let's just go. But yeah, I we don't know how. We know for a fact that this globalized capitalist civilization that we're living in is not sustainable, but we don't know how it ends, and we don't know what comes next. The hope of socialists is that there will be an opportunity to rebuild something better when all of this finally breaks down, no longer function. But it's a challenge because since the end of the Soviet experiment, there really isn't a blueprint for what that better society would look like. China is trying very hard, but
Mhm.
they've used capitalist development to transform their own society, their own economy, advance technologically to the forefront. Maybe they'll figure it out, perhaps. But we don't know any of that. And the Chinese Communist Party is something of a black box. How important is the future of global humanity to them from a climate perspective versus how important is protecting themselves from the United States and from other powers that seek to undermine their ability to operate sovereignty in a sovereign kind of way? We don't know that, right? We don't have influence over the Chinese Communist Party.
Mhm.
In our own Western world, the leadership class doesn't seem fit for purpose. No one is thinking about these ideas. It's all about getting rid of immigrants or culture war or anti-trans or even on the left. I see much more of an emphasis on welfarism and redistribution than on production and problem solving. I think that that's a major weakness in the electoral appeal of the left, and a limit to how ready leftist parties or political figures are to govern when and if they have the opportunity to do so. So, yeah, maybe the Chinese will save us. Keep your fingers crossed. The Russians will certainly not. Let me just use everyone of that notion, right? Putin and the Russian Federation have shown no interest in any kind of environmental remediation. Their wealth is entirely based on petrochemical extraction and export. It's not a just society, and they're mainly preoccupied with imperialist visions of national greatness, right? There's you don't have to be fully on the side of NATO to recognize the deficiencies and the realities of the Russian Federation. China, I think, has a much greater potential to play a positive role. Russia's a dead end. The West, like, don't you miss Biden now, right? Even the leadership, which was just woefully inadequate and deeply compromised on issues like Gaza, would be a breath of fresh air compared to what we have now, which is arsonists wearing a fire chief's hat. We'll see. We'll see if we can survive the short term and build in the medium term. But I would very much like to see a greater emphasis on the left for technical solutions and programs that are feasible, even if they require a different economic system, to address the realities of climate change and the risks to human life and human existence that come with it.
Socialism, as it is gaining popularity in the United States, is for making capitalism dispense treats. It turns capitalism into Pez dispenser, and then you can get candy from it. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's not a. I think that the treats engine is less a plank of socialism in America and more the desperate consolation prize that people have settled for now that the political imagination has been so shrunk, withered, and diminished that they can't actually believe in a better world. When I first came to the United States, Clinton was in charge. And it was clear to me through the types of policies that he pushed that in American democracy, you couldn't do anything to hurt the interests of billionaires and peak commercial interests, right? Like, you could potentially introduce a social project or some kind of scheme that would improve the lives of regular people, but it could never come at the expense of an entrenched, powerful group. That shifted under George W. Bush sometime to, yeah, you might be able to do something that helps regular Americans. For instance, covering pharmaceuticals under Medicare for seniors. But you could only do it if some billionaire or industry also benefited. Later, under Obama, it felt like, okay, we can do something to help people, but only if we attach it to something that really helps billionaires and industries. And now we've dispensed with any hope or pretext that policy helps actual people. Now, I think that represents not some essential feature of bourgeois liberal democracy, but the balance of forces where so much wealth has been concentrated in the hands of an ever smaller elite that they're just too powerful to stand up against. they'll need to be reduced in the power and influence they have in order to try to pursue any kind of broad-based national measures. Is that possible? I don't know. We'll see. One thing that the Chinese do seem to have figured out, CCP, is that every once in a while you have to shoot a billionaire.
I didn't say it. We have a super chat from Christopher Cotton. Just the usual shout out for this show and all the others TIR puts out. Also, Cuba, why so much alien talk today? What do you know?
I know that if aliens were here, then they'd be like, could somebody turn up the air conditioning?
Hey.
Yeah.
That's a fact. That's a fact. I don't know if you can hear mine in the background.
I can't remember the name of the series, but there's one, probably more than one at this point, sci-fi franchise that had the concept where global climate change was just geoengineering by an alien species that prefers to live in hot weather. So
it's us, we're the aliens. Maybe the billionaires or something. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the only way under these conditions that you might be able to get some climate leadership out of the United States would be if you could convince someone like Steve Miller that Black and brown people, for some reason, can survive in higher temperatures than white people. Therefore, global climate change is just going to produce a massive increase in the amount of Black and brown people in the world, and move their zone of exclusive habitation further and further north into the United States. That might create enough panic to be like, oh my God, no, we need to bring back the snow, right? Like, only where it snows can it truly be white, right?
Wow.
But short of that, I think that one future that the most fascist and reactionary elements in Western countries right now look towards is that climate change is going to affect tropical areas first and so much more heavily that we can just bake 4 billion people to death. And feature, not a bug.
Facts. Let's go from the Arctic, one of your favorite places, to one of your other favorite places. The one you talk about all the time, the Aral Sea, which isn't really a sea. So, what's going on with the Aral Sea? It sits between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and was once the fourth largest inland lake on Earth. Massive Soviet irrigation projects diverted the rivers feeding it to grow cotton, shrinking the sea by roughly 90% and leaving behind a toxic, salty desert nearly the size of Ireland. Scientists now believe the exposed seabed has become an unexpected source of carbon emissions, turning one of history's greatest environmental disasters into a contributor to climate change. The encouraging news, and there is encouraging news, is that restoration efforts are beginning to recover parts of the ecosystem, suggesting that even catastrophic environmental damage may not be permanent. How do you feel about that good news about one of your favorite parts of the world?
Well, so the Aral Sea, it's for those that in the 60s, 70s, right? Like the whole idea of a red and green synthesis that socialists and environmentalists could come together. That was challenged by the environmental record of the Soviet Union, which was absolutely dismal. the Soviets inherited this vast Russian space where they felt that nature was indomitable and limitless. You could take and take and take because there was no end to how much water there was, how much land there was, how what the forests and mines and land and earth and sea of the Soviet Union could produce. And as a result, environmental stewardship there was just non-existent. Nobody thought about what to do with pollution. Nobody thought about contamination. Nobody thought about the depletion of things like the Aral Sea. And control over information inside this totalitarian system. Well, if you were an environmental scientist and you were saying, hey, comrades, we're going to suck down the Aral Sea entirely, you don't have a position of responsibility. The guy responsible for the cotton quota in Uzbekistan, he has people that he needs to answer to. He tells you to shut up because the cotton must flow, right? The planned economy did not have environmental externalities built into the plan. As a result, there was just environmental catastrophe after environmental catastrophe across the length of the Soviet Union. This is not necessarily to say that pound for pound, it was worse than the West. After all, think about the Bhopal disaster, or was it the Love Tunnel or something? Superfund sites all across the United States.
Right.
The Cuyahoga River in Ohio lighting on fire, right?
Yeah.
There's plenty of environmental disasters in Western economies that were caused by the same kind of polluting industry. Soviet Union's record, not any better. And in some cases, because of the scale of the Soviet imagination, the ambitiousness of some of the planning, it could be very destructive. For instance, they drank up the entire Aral Sea. Now, that catastrophe, like you said, is compounding. Not only is the sea gone, but the seabed exposed then leaches carbon into the atmosphere, as well as putting all kinds of dust and particulates, leading to sandstorms. It's just bad. It is just terrible, terrible what happened to the Aral Sea. Now, you mentioned that there is this silver lining, that there has been recovery in some areas, new growth, colonization by plant species, shift away from the wasteland of the dry seabed towards more productive environments, ecologies. And I've got an intellectual quibble there. I don't think that we can talk about restoration in the case of something like the Aral Sea, or more broadly, restoration from whatever climate reality we'll be facing in the future. What is happening is change. We're not going back to the better way that it was before. We have to recognize that what will come next will be different. It need not be terrible, right? You might be able to try to re-engineer, to rewild territory that's been degraded. But what's coming back is not necessarily going to be what history attests to. You might be introducing new species, or the regrowth may be a different ecosystem, a different ecology than what was there before. I'm told that I think it's California, box crabs are becoming a delicacy. And it's because previously the water was too cold for them. But with climate change, species moved further north, and now there's this unexpected windfall, this unexpected benefit that comes with it. We need to take the lesson from failed Soviet planning and make sure that whatever economic or developmental goals we're pursuing have that environmental impact built into them from the beginning. So if we're destroying something, at least we know what we're doing, at least we can think about how to remediate or how to mitigate the destruction. And two, find the ways in which you can improve degraded or desolate land, even if it means moving to a new type of ecology with new species rather than preserving what was there before. It may be harder and harder for Arctic species that are the most specialized for cold weather. That may just be gone. Already polar bears are under a great deal of stress. I don't know how much longer they'll be able to dominate the Arctic in the same way that they have. But whenever possible, we should be thinking about taking wastelands, territories that have been degraded by industry or desertification, and turn them into the most stable, the most ecologically productive that we can. Often, if you get the foundations right, the right plant species, the right mix of animals, and the right biome, then this needs very little human intervention to keep going. It's a process that starts out on its own and then amplifies. But this requires the exact type of environmental research that DOGE gutted from the US system. And as much as possible, other countries must be encouraged to pick up the slack and put their resources into this kind of awareness, not just for the practical uses now, for their importance down the line when we're trying to reclaim as much degraded territory as possible.
We do have a super chat, but I wanted to mention quickly. You had talked about the cotton crops, and one of the ways you can get this kind of environmental degradation and devastation is by growing crops in a monoculture. That is planting the same plant as far as the eye can see in rows, one after the other one. And this does not occur in nature at all. Different plant species will grow next to each other. There are some farming methods that utilize this in order to, get a bigger yield of all the plants that they grow together. But growing in a monoculture is incredibly destructive. We see that in the U.S. South as well. Um, the land, it's never really going to bounce back. It seems from slavery times when it was let's grow all the cotton here. And cotton is a very thirsty plant. It requires a lot of water. And so yeah, I was a little disappointed to see, like, after the Cuban Revolution, um, Castro went back to monoculture crops and cash crops. I understand the constraints that he was under, but as the person on the left, I would like to see us abandon that. If we're going to set up a new project, let us not do that again.
So here's the thing.
Yes. Yes.
No one likes hippies,
Yeah.
which makes it so much harder to admit when they have a point. And they very frequently do. It's maddening. It's one of the fundamental paradoxes of Western civilization. The reason that many countries, many agricultural systems end up with monocultures is that they're easy to manage. It comes down to that simple reality, right? If you have rows and rows of the same crop, you can take a relatively low-skilled labor force, get them to do the same things repetitively, and you have a reliable, predictable output. right? And an easy way to manage it from a decision maker's perspective. That's especially attractive when your workforce is unfree, right? Slaves in the U.S. South, serfs, peasants, landed, people who are tied to the land, sharecroppers, across much of the global South into Europe. And when you look at collectivization in the Soviet sphere, collectivized agriculture operates on principles much more closely resembling pre-revolutionary peasant villages in Russia than they do either pre-agricultural labor or post-capitalist socialist promises. These were all systems that were taking a very dim view of agricultural labor and the agricultural workforce and just treating them as a low-cost, low-quality input to try to squeeze out as much yield as possible. This happens whenever you scale up agriculture. If you give a subsistence farmer one tiny plot of land, then they'll maximize the hell out of it, which frequently means ecologically sound techniques where you combine different species and different uses. You have a rotation of crops, but you also might have chickens or hogs that will eat some of the agricultural waste, that also produce natural fertilizer that you can put over your fields. Put in some apiaries, get some bees going, have some permaculture with fruit trees, have crops maturing at different phases, different time periods over the course of the year, different seasons, so that your labor is spread out over the course of the year. And you end up maximizing yield in a holistic kind of way, often by using what are essentially, the free powers of nature to improve your conditions rather than relying on inputs that come from the market. As soon as you scale up land so that the individual farmer no longer deals with the same territory that they can get a real granular feel for, but they're moving across an enormous, county-sized agricultural operation, and they're reduced to just doing a few routine, repetitive tasks, watering, clearing, and then harvesting. Well, they're not going to know enough about the land, about the local agricultural lore and traditions, sometimes related to water management, sometimes which species go with which, sometimes seasonality. All of that knowledge will be lost. There's not going to be a mechanism to communicate it across generations. You're going to instead have management by people who don't know the land, who just see it at the spreadsheet level, right? Guys in ties. And they'll make decisions based on what's legible to them, which is not the land itself, but markets, prices, yield tables. So much knowledge is lost in that transition, but so much managerial leverage is gained. And that's the seduction towards monoculture. If you have monoculture too, there's this erroneous belief that by reducing the number of variables, you can control everything. Ecologically forward, ecologically conscious agriculture increases the amount of variables by introducing new species and dependencies between them. This makes it appear more fragile. because there's more things that can go wrong. There's more moving pieces. But in reality, it also disperses the risk. A single point of failure may wipe out one particular crop one year, but if that's only 5 to 7% of your overall yield, you're doing okay. While producers, whether they're Soviet cotton farmers or corn in the American Midwest, or sugar in the Caribbean, one pest, one disease, one adverse climate event or weather situation or shift in the weather, and you could lose everything, because it all depends on a single crop with its own vulnerabilities. That reality, I feel, is only really being understood right now as the climate risks pile up and the possibility for the catastrophic failure of an entire crop. That comes into focus.
Very true, especially with all the droughts and climate instability is what it's called. I just want to address this really quickly. Sean Moon is insisting that capitalism, especially I guess U.S. capitalism, was vastly more destructive than anything ever done by the Soviet Union. And I just want to say that I wasn't mentioning that in order to compare the two in that way. Like, it's not a competition. It comes from the same view of the earth. So you're thinking of them as being two separate systems, but the source is sort of the same. And these decisions grew out of that, and came before socialism, communism, or capitalism.
Well,
And
hmm,
okay, let me just continue. Robin here says this is why the future is indigenous. So it's sort of like there's a divergence from indigenous culture. And I'm just saying that what the Soviets did, socialism, communism, as well as capitalism, came from that divergence, and that is one reason why, particularly capitalism, is so hostile to the indigenous, because the approaches are so different, and capitalism has the approach of annihilation, and so that's where a lot of the hostility towards indigenous communities and anything practices comes from. That's sort of my mangled way of addressing that. Please, Kuba, be eloquent on top of
well,
that.
hmm, the I think that there's a real conflation, simplification of messy reality that
Hmm.
happens when we talk about capitalism as an entire system, and America is representative of that, and communism is what the Soviets did, and indigenous people are inherently tied to the land, and better sort of intuitive stewards of how things work. Uh, I think that rather than trying to say this is what this system is and which is the best system, we should just look at what was done, the
Hmm.
practice in different environments by different groups. Now, the um, Soviet experiment was consciously patterned on US style capitalism,
Hmm.
not in the sense of the economic distribution or what you do with the surplus, but um, in the sense of what are the techniques that the Americans use to get their farm yields up? How does Western industry operate? And it took that logic of technological systems, advanced modernity, and it applied it in this Bolshevik version,
Hmm.
Bolshevik model. it's funny because collectivized agriculture in the Soviet Union represented the worst aspects of both pre-revolutionary Russia and the United States. From the United States, it took this emphasis on scale, size, mechanization, and monoculture. We're going to have just massive farms all producing the same thing. It'll be like Iowa. It'll be great. Mm-hmm. But they didn't have the underlying infrastructure to feed in all of the inputs like the United States, so they never got the same yields. Not only that, but they didn't have the profit mechanism to take high agricultural prices when they did occur and turn them into investable income that could be plowed back into agricultural regions. So Soviet agricultural production always sucked. It was always terrible. And on the other side, at least in the United States, speaking of the northern sort of plains and the agriculture of the upper Midwest, at least people could leave. And you had family farms as well, farmers that owned their own land. Sometimes some of those operations were very enlightened. Some of them were very productive. Not every farmer was a disaster area. In the Soviet Union, instead, they took the pre-revolutionary system where you have entire communities that owe rent or feudal service obligations to landowners, aristocrats, the crown, often religious institutions, and shifted that so that you maintained the collective responsibility and tying people to the land. But the new landlord was the state. Mm-hmm. So they neither managed to get the technical transition to American-style agriculture right, nor did they break up the feudal manorial relationship between agricultural producers, agricultural workers, and the landowners. Just the nature of the landowner shifted, stopped being these feudal groups, started being the state. And it sucked. It was absolutely terrible. It was really, really bad. It led to environmental degradation. It also led to extremely low yields and to the idiot stagnation of the Soviet countryside. It was bad, right? There's a reason why the Soviet Union isn't around anymore. They were in a situation where they had very few good options. In the case of agriculture, they actually did have a much better model because of the short Bukharinite new economic policy, the NEP years, when you did empower villages and farm producers to organize and manage their own affairs, to plan their own production. And that was the period when that was probably the best period to be Russian in all of history. But that ended with Stalinism and collectivization. And instead you had these very low productivity, very miserable agricultural operations that also tended to have bad ecological impacts down the road. Now, I think that there's we should distinguish between different indigenous groups, because some do have very deep connections and knowledge of their ancestral territories and ways of tapping into natural ecosystems and this awareness of their environment in order to produce more reliable and sustainable types of output, whether it's fishing, hunting, agriculture, you name it. Some of them don't, you know. Some indigenous people are people, right? Some of them were great, some of them sucked. And to the extent that they were great, it largely had to do with the way that they lived and produced locally. And in a sort of Marxian base follows superstructure, or superstructure follows base. that type of life close to salmon runs, whether in the Pacific Northwest, or close to game animals in other parts of North America, close to agricultural production and irrigation in the Pueblo peoples of the Southwest, or in the maize cultures of Mesoamerica. There was a great deal of knowledge embedded into generational practices producing food out of nature. That's what you want to tap into. And there's a natural affinity between modern concepts of ecology, ecological science, with many of those hyper-local, understand the land, understand the dependencies between different species, environmental conditions, that come out of many indigenous ways of life. So tying those two back together, where you have ecologists learning from indigenous practices and indigenous practitioners, and not just indigenous practitioners, ideally everyone who works in agriculture or natural resource management, adapts the most effective and sustainable techniques and broaden them, get them in dialogue with one another. Not everything is going to work everywhere, right? Part of what we're talking about is the need to be hyper local in applying your business plans and your agricultural techniques, so that you are not disrupting and degrading the land, and you are finding uses for every step, every phase, every element of the local ecosystem. In some cases, you're going to find yourself producing, you're going to go in thinking that this is an operation to grow hemp or corn or some other product. But in getting to know the land, you're going to discover that there are other products that you may have even thought of as byproducts or waste that also have useful applications. That's the hope of sort of Pete Buttigieg, enlightened reptilian bourgeois capitalist management, is that you can do so in ways that also show up on the spreadsheets and the price tables and the market management, visible to the bespectacled tie-wearing classes. That shouldn't be the focus. That shouldn't be the goal, right? Like, not everything is put on this earth in order to make the lives of Rhodes scholars easier. But if you could find a way to express those advantages in the language of the market, then there's a hope. I'm not saying it's my hope, but from the perspective of people who push for a sort of Green New Deal type reevaluation, renovation of American capitalism to make it more sustainable in the way that FDR led with his program, that would be how you did it. And there's things like the ESG, environmental, social, and governance certifications for investments that were an attempt to try to introduce this calculus into peak investment decisions and planning decisions while maintaining the capitalist foundation of the system. Maybe we get back to that. Maybe that's what anarcho-Bidenism is all about. But right now, we're all stuck in the back seat of a car being driven by a lunatic, senile, demented, narcissistic sociopath that whose time is ticking down to the point where he values the safety of the vehicle and all the lives in it less and less with each passing moment. So step one is just getting out of the situation that we're in.
2.5 more years.
Inshallah.
Yeah. There's somebody in the chat still going on about capitalism. Just want to say we addressed it. Obviously, we're not pro capitalism here. I don't want to see you in the comments hating from outside the club, okay? Done with this topic. We have a super chat from Bay Planner that I think came through half an hour ago. Bay Planner says, always a great show, TIR. What about the AMOC collapse effects to the North Atlantic and Europe? Let me just read what that is. An AMOC collapse refers to the potential shutdown or critical weakening of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, a vital conveyor belt of ocean currents driven by differences in water temperature and salinity. Can you speak to this?
I can. The AMOC, it's funny because if you subscribe to Jacobian race theory and the white devil hypothesis, AMOC is basically the demonic breakthrough that makes white people possible. What it is current in the North Atlantic that moves warmer temperature water along the coast of Spain, France, Ireland, Great Britain, and Iceland, all the way to Greenland, which helps mitigate the climate in Western Europe. If you look at the latitudes of European cities, they are much further north than what you expect. Compare them to places in North America, and there's many European towns that have livable climates that seem perfectly comfortable, that would be in the frigid, uninhabitable regions of Canada. And the thing that makes that possible is this current that keeps the temperatures of Western Europe relatively balmy in the winter. If that current is disrupted, and it has been disrupted in the past, then you suddenly have much colder temperatures and much harsher winters all across Western Europe. The extinction of the Greenland Norse is theorized to have had to do with a disruption in that current that led to the so-called Little Ice Age of the medieval period, where the Thames River in London froze over. There were shortages of crops, food issues all across Europe. Oh, we haven't even talked about the starving stones.
So
that
sounds intense.
This had to do more with the heat wave in Europe, but across, because Europe actually represents, in some ways, one of the strongest places of continuity of indigenous civilization, largely because the indigenous people there are the white colonials in the rest of the world, right? So you have cities that have been proximate to rivers for centuries, for millennia, which means that they've seen good times and bad times, climatically speaking. There are stones that are carved along riverbanks in European urban settlements. The ones that I'm thinking of are mostly in the Czech Republic, where as the water level declines, the text becomes visible. And it's basically a bunch of warnings, right? Like, oh, if you can read this, you're in trouble.
Great.
And then when the first one was revealed, it's like, oh, that's interesting. And then as the drought circumstances continued and the water level continued to diminish, you could see that there were more warnings. It's like, at this point, some of you will starve. And finally, like, now all you can do is pray. So conditions in Europe could, in the short term, look like fires, droughts, severe weather, heat waves.
Mhm.
And then as climate change undermines the AMOC, all of a sudden you shift to a situation in which it's hard to grow certain crops in Europe because it gets so cold. You might have this very abrupt reversion to temperatures that create problems in the other direction. Now, I can just imagine how this will be read by conservative anti-environmental groups who will say, like, wait, I thought you said global warming was the problem. Why is there a little ice age in Europe?
Mhm.
I guess this means we can pollute all we want. Yeah, so we've got that to look forward to as well.
I think I remember the Thames River freezing. It happened more than once, and there's
The
a
ten-
painting of people ice skating.
The Thames froze during the Little Ice Age
Mhm.
and during a couple of globally significant volcanic eruptions that
Right.
produced sort of mini nuclear winters. So it does happen. It has happened more than once. It was never good. Right?
Yeah.
The Thames. We could say that Thames is freezing over instead of hell, right? Like, secularize that expression, but it amounts to the same thing.
That's pretty scary. A river freezing so solidly that you can ice skate on it and paint on it, apparently.
If the thing is, if this were the Amur or the Ob, any of the great Siberian rivers, it wouldn't be a thing because it
Hmm.
happens every year. Going through a major European capital, itself a major maritime trade route.
Hmm.
Like, think about all of the barge and freight traffic that gets complicated when the Thames freezes over. What are you going to do about that? And there's a great deal of stress that's placed on all of the built environment as well when you have cycles of hydrological freezing, thawing. That breaks down concrete. That can really degrade urban environment quickly.
The East River has frozen in New York City before. And, they get the ships to break the ice. Um, I call it that dirty hot dog water. But it's a little freaky to see it. I think somebody tried to like ski or skate across it like recently when we had this cold snap, and cops had to go get him. Like, somebody had to go take care of this person who, maybe the ice is never as solid as you think, unless you're having a little ice age, I guess. We've got one more story to get to, and this one is not exactly located in one place. This is pretty widespread. Let's talk about, are all the trees you see real? So, we've spent the last hour, 2 hours now, talking about crises. Crises. I had it before the show, and now I can't say it. Let's end on something a little stranger. As wireless networks expand, thousands of cellular towers have been disguised as pine trees, palm trees, cacti. I believe it's cactuses now, yes? Church steeples, flagpoles, and other familiar objects to reduce public opposition. While many of these fake trees are easy to spot, they reveal something interesting about modern society. We increasingly depend on infrastructure that we prefer not to see. The camouflage says as much about our relationship with technology and nature as it does about aesthetics. Or does it? How do you feel about that?
So I've got some bad news for you. Um, the this is nothing new.
Yeah.
For instance, the electrical grid relies on transformers that are substantial. There are these stations in some suburban areas where there might be less of a less built up. Sometimes they're out in the open, fenced off with all the signs, risk of electrocution. Kids are told not to play there.
Mhm.
But in many suburban areas, many urban areas, um, you can't just leave them out in the open.
Mhm.
So instead, what's very common in Ontario, for instance, is you build basically a movie set around it. You make the transformer look like a suburban home.
Mhm.
You give it an address like anything else. The employees of the electrical company just show up as though they're visiting friends, do what they need to do, and they move on. People don't know they have a transformer station right next door or across the street. And I think that's great, right? We need this infrastructure. There's no reason that it needs to be ugly. There's no reason that it needs to be particularly visible.
Mhm.
I don't see an issue with dressing up cell phone towers. And to the extent that the alternative would be actually going to a real church steeple, chiseling out a bunch of, 17th century stone in order to get the wiring in and putting a giant dish next to the cross. Maybe just build a fake tree instead, right?
Yes.
That bothers me less than you might think than any of the other issues that we've flagged so far. The problem is where that intersects with the conspiratorial mentality that's been
Mm.
basically universally cultivated. If you put up a fake tree and you tell everyone it's a fake tree, well, that undermines some of the advantages of hiding your cell tower as a fake tree. You don't
Mhm.
want people to look at it. You don't want people to take pictures of it. You don't want people sniffing around it because it's hazardous. They might break it. They might hurt themselves. It's best if it just blends in and people ignore it. But as soon as people are aware that there's something that they want you to ignore, then it's immediately like, okay, so is this the cancer tree, or is it the mind control tree, or is it the turning the frogs gay tree, or
Mhm.
is it the space lasers tree, right? You can very easily frame that type of gesture to whatever conspiracy theory you're pushing. And when there's such low trust in elites and technical specialists, people will sooner believe that COVID is caused by the fake 5G trees than, look, man, we just didn't want your kids vandalizing our shit.
Yeah. I find it a little disturbing, a little perverse. There was a Kenyan environmental activist named Wangari Maathai. I believe she's a Nobel Prize winner. She has this quote about saving the trees, and she says there's so many enemies of trees. And I read that quote a few years ago, and I was like, that's weird. What a weird thing to say. But when you look around, when you look at Brazil and all of these places where people are just clear cutting to put cows, and there is like a lot of hostility to trees. I just had this conversation with Jason on air a few days ago, and it's been on my mind ever since. And he was talking about hunger versus like saving trees, and I'm like, trees give you air, and it's a little audacious of you to be breathing while trashing trees. Also, trees can give you food. What are we talking about here? Like, what's going on? So these fake trees are simulations. They're versions of the real thing that would be valued so much more than the real thing. Like, these are expensive trees. These are trees we care
Indeed.
about.
Indeed. Well, I think that vision, that sort of statement, trees have so many enemies. There is something about a particular kind of Western colonialism that really is anti-forest. And it's different than the same issue, it's different than forestry in the European center. Mm-hmm. It's not like white people hate trees. No, white people love trees. White people love their own forests. But when you have a society that is oriented towards commercial exploitation, profit maximizing, and they come across wilderness, mm-hmm. they do not stop to ask, what does the wilderness produce that is valuable? What's already in there that we should protect, preserve, treasure? Mm-hmm. Instead, they think, what are profit-making opportunities? Mm-hmm. How do I convert this wasteland, this totally unproductive, useless territory that is also somehow teeming with life, into something that makes money? Mm-hmm. And a little like we talked with monoculture, the advantages of land clearance, destroying the forest and putting something else in, is not so much on the productivity side, but the management side. When you clear land and you eliminate the forest and the wildlife on it, mm-hmm. then you are no longer at the mercy of the ecological processes that you don't understand, that might be completely invisible to you. You've wiped out the indigenous people or driven them off, so they can't tell you mm-hmm. that this is good for eating, this is useful for materials, this is a keystone species that prevents some disease-carrying vector from multiplying exponentially. You have none of that knowledge. You just see a bunch of stuff that you can't turn into money. So you destroy it all and you turn it into money. And that's been progressing across Latin America, now across Africa. It's already eaten through most of North America. All right, at least the areas where people live. Mm-hmm. Even northern Canadian territories are vulnerable to that kind of expansion when settlement patterns change. So I think that, what do you do about this? Partly, you have to try to put some brakes on this engine, right? Because it really does feel like there's this force that was unleashed with European colonization that seeks to eat into every wilderness and convert it into strip malls and monocultures. Mm-hmm. You have to try to put some brakes on that. You have to force people to price in the externalities of destroying ecosystems, of reducing the carbon capture capacity of rainforests, things like that. And you also have to find ways of adding as assets the biodiversity and the research potential of these kinds of ecosystems. Because if we're going to find new antibiotics or novel pharmaceuticals, if we're going to break through some barriers in material science, these types of ecosystems are actually extremely fruitful for new compounds, new research, new ways of biologically producing significant materials, right? Like I'm on the one hand both strongly pro-conservation and strongly pro-Frankenscience. I think the two actually go hand in glove.
Oh, sounds terrifying.
Yeah, it is by protecting and studying natural ecosystems that we can get the really good Frankenscience going. Therefore, I look at land clearing for, like for cheap hamburger. I was like, what the hell are you doing? Don't you understand? You might be destroying some future bioweapon. You might be paving over the frog species that allows us to genetically manipulate our descendants, right? What the hell? Priorities, people, priorities. So that's the reformed lizard person mentality that I would like to see instantiated in more decision making. Now, these fake trees, in some ways, might be beneficial for the preservation of ecosystems, because once you've got a fake tree up, it's a little weird if you clear all the land around it and it's like, well, this is the one tree we couldn't cut down because it's actually a cell phone tower. But yeah, I think that we need to pay more attention to existing forests and preserve them. I'm not averse to the idea of dedicating large swaths of land for managed forestry. You're growing trees in order to cut them down in the future, but that should be managed as ecologically as possible and allowing for mixed use, so have wildlife species going in and out, maybe introduce some mycoculture or, harvesting berries, other types of forest products. There's no reason why you only do one
products.
Forest products.
That's wild. Forest products. By the way, Mary Shelley is flipping over in her grave. Frankencuba lives.
If you think about all of the breakthroughs that have really made human life easier, longer, better, it's all poking your finger in the eye of God, shaking down Mother Nature to steal her secrets, and then applying them for better living through chemistry. Whether it's, ayahuasca is a forest product. Take that, hippies.
Chat is rebelling against you. Okay, one person. Lumpin' Larry says, man, I really hope my coworkers and neighbors don't find out about fake trees. They're still on that litter boxes in classrooms thing.
Yeah. So did you know that the first, what we might call a modern welfare state, or the very beginnings of it, where you had public access to education, basic health care, support for public nutrition, that was introduced in Prussia by Otto von Bismarck. And the reason for it had nothing to do with any of the welfarist concerns or the social justice concerns of the left. It was a right-wing nationalist project. And it didn't have any humanitarian right-wing concerns about white babies either. It came down to the realization that if you're going to fight the French, if you're going to be competing as a modern military power, then you need soldiers that show up literate, healthy, tall, capable. And this doesn't happen naturally. If you just let landholders exploit peasants, if you let capitalists exploit workers, then the average soldier coming in when you launch a conscription campaign is going to be stunted, ignorant, fearful, useless, right? You're going to have to invest so much more into training them up than you would if they had arrived capable. And this is an observation that's made by American educators as well. Students should have access to free food at the school because hungry kids don't learn, they don't develop, they don't grow. Tired, hungry school child grows up to be a difficult adult, not a productive worker. And I think that in the US especially, but across the West, steps away from public education and investment in the institutions and the infrastructure to get an educated, capable, engaged citizenry, that's produced this void where so many people, they have curiosity about the world and an awareness that larger decisions are driving events in their own lives, but they don't have the critical reasoning, they don't have the base of knowledge, they don't have the understanding of how systems operate to engage with it in an enlightened way. And instead, they are susceptible to magical thinking, errors in reasoning, and manipulation by malign actors, whether it's to exploit them economically or to direct them against political enemies. I think that one reason why you have less of a collapse in certain Western countries and why Asia is doing as well as it has been is because of this emphasis on education universally. We need to find a way to reconnect the intellectual class, educators, with as broad a segment of the working class as possible. And the UK did that very well in the post-war period. You had things like the Open University, you had educational programming on television. In many countries, actually, across the West, you had the delivery of education by TV and radio to remote areas. So people, it was just a normalized thing that you spend time on your screens learning, and that you trust the person, the Miss Rachel on the other end, that's telling you about Palestine. That feels like it's been degraded substantially, and partly, largely, as a deliberate policy of conservative governments. I don't know how you reproduce this. Like, how do we get back to a place where people are spending their leisure time learning from trusted sources in a way that builds and reinforces communities rather than enriches the most dubious influencers, right? How do we get Tucker Carlson replaced with a non-evil version? But until we get to that point, then accurate information about the world will be read as validating different types of dangerous conspiracy theories. And you never know where that ends up.
Very true, especially these days. I did see in the chat that a while ago Scott Parkin was in there and he left a quick note, quick message Scott said it should be noted that the climate is not a topic in any of these primaries happening around the country. Climate hushing in more mainstream politics have become the norm.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's
that is absolutely true. And we see it in Canada. It was quite explicit.
mm,
Mark Carney just put it out there. It's like, look, now that we're being threatened by the United States, now that the world has become so uncertain, we just can't afford to wind down our energy sector. We have to get it out and we have to sell it as quickly as possible, because otherwise we won't have the resources we need to protect ourselves. At
can't fight
least,
that.
yeah, at least then, at least there was an awareness, right? At least it was explicit that this
Right.
trade-off was taking place and that Canada was taking this route. In the US, it seems as though one reason why the AI data center issue is so live is because it's the last way in which environmental concerns can be laundered back in, can be reintroduced, right? These AI data centers that you hate for the noise, the disruption, the light, the quality of life issues around you. But also don't forget the water, the electricity, the carbon footprint. Because the experience of living near these data centers is so tangible, so viscerally accessible as a bad thing. If you can get the environmental externalities associated with that, then you can get people thinking about the environment again. But the political situation right now, it feels like the immediate crises, right? ICE dragging you out
Mm-hmm.
at a red light because you're too brown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that person is going to have other concerns than the environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, yes, green hushing is a real issue. It's also, let's face it, the environment is a real bummer, right? Basically, everything is getting better. There's no upside. We need to find ways of talking about it that are more optimistic. But at the very minimum, if there is a blue wave, if Democratic political figures return to having some policy setting power in the U.S., you can't let them forget. You can't let them turn the page on, like, okay, that was a 2010, 2014, 2020 issue, and now we're just going to be talking about Iran and the price of eggs. And I think too that tying in inflation, sustainability, supply chain security, resilience as different parts of the conversation around food price inflation and control of the food system would be a good way to link together the environmental impact while talking about people's experiences with food and what food does for them. In some ways, greenwashing, the green hushing, might be an opportunity for people concerned about the environment, because instead of having one specific environment bucket, that this is an issue that we need to promote ahead of other issues, instead you disperse it so that the environmental impact of any given proposal is built into the discussion of that proposal, right? AI data centers can't get away from talking about their environmental footprint. Space programs can't get away from talking about their environmental footprint. Crypto can't get away from talking about its environmental footprint. Same with the food system. Trying to get it in on every level might be better than, at least for the time being, before there's a prospect of returning to large scale resilience and mitigation planning. Until then, put it in every single issue, find a way to introduce it to every debate?
Uh, a few weeks ago, famed meteorologist and NASA climatologist Hassan Piker was saying, well, speculating that the recent heat waves have to do with the surge in AI data centers, the surge in their usage. And I mean, I haven't seen anything about that correlation. It seems like a pretty immediate impact for that to be the case, but it does not help anything. It is so amazing to me that humans created crypto, which is like pretty much built to just destroy the environment. And then they were like, yo, let's do it again. Let's make it something that'll be really widespread and adopted. And we're like, yo, let's take all the water and use it for data centers.
I think that among the tech bros, there's an accelerationist tendency
Yes.
that has written off, had already written off democratic civilization, right? It was already Peter Thiel saying, oh, freedom and democracy are not compatible. This is all going to hell. It's all going to crash inevitably. Why not go all gas, no brakes? I think that they've already, that the more advanced elements in that thinking do the same with environmental collapse. Okay, it's inevitable. No point trying to stall it now. What are we going to do? Buy 5 minutes? So let's go straight to the collapse and figure out how to rebuild from there. Crypto is the play for owning money after the end of the state.
Mm-hmm.
One of the major consequences of the Iran conflict is an unprecedented level of stress on the global financial system, which, since the abandonment of the gold standard, has been based on the so-called petrodollar. You need dollars because dollars are the only currency in which you can buy energy, Middle Eastern hydrocarbons.
Mm-hmm.
So that creates global demand for US dollars, even by countries that never touch the US economy. Malaysia has US dollars, the Philippines have US dollars, South Korea has US dollars just to buy oil. Except now, Iran won't let any of the US denominated oil leave. And Iranian oil can't be purchased with US dollars because of sanctions. Russian oil can't be purchased with US dollars because of sanctions. So Iran has started accepting Chinese yuan and crypto in order to make up for its exclusion from the dollar denominated financial system. So the idea is that, well, the US is heading to zero. It's going to crash. It's going to break up. Certainly can't sustain the hegemony required to be the petrodollar guarantor. What's going to replace the US dollar? Well, the crypto bros hope that it's going to be some kind of blockchain valuation and that they'll be able to own the currency making of the post-American age. And sure, let's destroy the entire environment just for that, because if I control money, who cares if there are any trees left?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that gambler style, there's a bit of a all-in Hail Mary type perspective on the potential for general artificial intelligence. If you can get, or artificial general intelligence, AGI, if you can get to that singularity, which Sam Altman is telling us has already happened, which obviously has nothing to do with financial difficulties of OpenAI, then it'll solve all our problems, and we don't have to invest in climate remediation or anything else, because the one thing we are investing in, AGI, is going to take care of everything. There's a Silicon Valley expression: if you've got an hour to chop down a tree, spend 55 minutes sharpening your axe, right? That by investing in the meta level, you're going to have just a multiplier effect down the road when you start investing in practical applications and real world problems. And this is a sound strategy, especially if you're playing video games, right? If you are busy in your World War II simulator trying to really crush the Brits, because of course, you're a Silicon Valley tech bro, you're playing as the Nazis, then you're going to get your biggest bang for your buck if you unlock the multiplier text first, right? If you can unlock the 5% efficiency boost for your oil early on, then that reverberates through your entire economy. It's a huge gain. The issue with that is we don't know if AGI will actually solve anything. We don't know if it will, what kinds of solutions it suggests. Because maybe it's like, oh, okay, I see what the problem is. Oh, okay. You've destroyed your climate, and now there's issues with the food system, the political structures are falling apart. Okay, I get it. So, and you want me to come up with the solution for it. Let's kill the poorest 50% of the entire population. Here are 5 specially engineered pathogens that will go after the least genetically valuable. Which, from the tech bro perspective, is cool, but should horrify everyone else.
Hopefully it does. Those guys are not normal, for lack of a better word. I don't want to say not human, but maybe not as in touch with their humanity as other
Well,
people.
there's that viral clip of Peter Thiel being interviewed by Ross Douthat, who's not an adversarial interviewer. He's a smart guy, but he, he's a Christian psycho and an establishment conservative shill. And he was asking a very simple question. So, do you think that it's a good thing if the human civilization, the human species, survives? And that is the question that Peter Thiel struggled with, right? It's, I don't have a particularly romantic view of human nature myself, and I try to be as realistic as possible. People are people. Some of them are great, some of them suck. But the Peter Thiel view is qualitatively different from that, right? Or Elon Musk saying that biological life is just a bootstrapping mechanism to get you to artificial general intelligence. It's like, okay, so now we know what you think of the rest of us.
Right.
And yeah, like, I think that we may discover that all of these investments, all of these moves, crypto, AGI, that were supposed to deliver some kind of better future for at least a part of humanity, just speed runs climate collapse without getting you anything usable at the end. And, like, if I need to cross my fingers and pray for a Deus Ex Machina to come in and save everything in the 11th hour, instead of AGI, why not the CCP?
All
And
right.
on that note,
we have this from Sune, one of our mods. saying thanks MT and Kuba, great stream. Thank you to our other mod Dusty. Thank you to the chat, everybody listening. Just a reminder, Bad Lefty says, you heard the tie wearing lady. Press like, you grumpy commie bastards. Press like, don't be foolish. Why wouldn't you? That is a reference to the late Michael Brooks. It's been 6 years last month. So RIP to a real one. Do you want to say anything in closing, Kuba? Did you have fun? Did you have fun,
Yeah,
Bunny?
this was great. This was great. So I'll be back Monday, and then Sunday we've got the next generation with Stefan and Quinn.
Great.
And thank you for doing this, MT. I think that the environmental dimension is a major aspect of the crisis that we're in. In some ways, it's the most important, it's the most fundamental. And this shouldn't even be a controversial issue. Like I said, Pentagon planners, as early as the 90s, were already looking at climate as being a driver of instability, a potential source of threat and a risk for U.S. national security. And those guys, as far as I can tell, very few Marxist-Leninists in the Department of Defense. So anyone sane recognizes the dangers here, and I look forward to, maybe we can get Sparky back for another discussion. I really appreciate his willingness to come on the show and to help us talk all of this through as well.
That was awesome. We do have a question. What are you talking about this Sunday, Kuba? I can't believe you're working 3 days in a row.
I know. It's outrageous. There's some, I got to contact my union rep. We're doing the modern half of the great military leaders bracket. We did the classics last time. So many Greeks, so many Romans. But this time we're getting into the good stuff. You're going to see some Polish names, a lot of Polish names. Kościuszko is a good one, but he didn't have enough. Yeah. It's a shame about how his rebellion ended. But in any case, that's for tomorrow. I gotta keep some of the good stuff for the air.
That's exciting. So yeah, I want you guys to give us comments. If you're listening on audio, email Jason. Give us your feedback. Let us know how you like this. Let us know if you want us to do this again. We started out with 11 different places on the planet, and we just whittled it down to what we thought would work for this episode. If there are issues or places you would like us to cover more in the global south, maybe we'll do a part 2. Let us know if you're interested in that. Let us know if you like this format. Maybe we'll leave more room for your super chats during that show, because Jason says I currently have my water shut off and now the power just went out. So he's doing his thing for the environment right now, but we could use the super chat.
Thank you for your service.
Get him some candles. He could probably use those. That would be good. Rate the show in your app if you're listening to audio. Anything else? Sell, Cuba.
Put us out in front of your friends. If you know anyone at Majority Report, if spam everybody that's higher up on the food chain than we are, so that they'll let us in. And if you know anybody that we could possibly platform that would actually benefit them, then by all means, let's have them on the show. Let's get our community out and engaged with as many people as possible.
Sounds fantastic. And we are
out.
Peace.